Hello, my name is Jack Brown, and I'm a master's student at Indiana University at Bloomington. Despite my current affiliation, today I am presenting a project that was done entirely at the Illinois State Geological Survey and the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Without further ado, let's dig a little bit further into this project. In order to talk about our formation, the Carper Sandstone, and our reinterpretation of its deposits, we first need to discuss sediment gravity flows and the ever-changing framework us geologists use to classify such flows. Now, based on the result of certain fluid and sediment interactions, end members of sediment gravity flows can be derived and then applied to basins to make some simplifications of the area's history and reservoir potential. In this presentation, I'll review a few sediment gravity flow end members that are particularly relevant to our study area and hopefully show a little bit about how the classification scheme for sediment gravity flows has evolved through time. The first sediment gravity flow type that will be discussed is the turbidite. A turbidite is a classic unit that is deposited by a submarine current that contains a relatively dilute sediment-water mixture, usually in a turbulent flow regime. Research on turbidites reached its first peak in 1962 when Dr. Arnold Bauma described the depositional sequence of a turbidite, which would later go on to be called the Bauma sequence. The sequence describes the idealized internal divisions of a turbidite, a massive sandy base that finds upwards into a natural mud cap. The sequence is a useful tool for describing this sediment gravity flow end member, but has a few shortfalls, including failing to incorporate different grain sizes, flow transformation mid-flow, and much more. Its five-fold approach is also too simplistic to describe the wide complexity of submarine sediment gravity flows. The sediment gravity flow framework further evolved with the introduction of fine-grained turbidites. Bauma's model failed to explain the stratigraphic signatures of turbidites with a mean grain size of less than 63 microns. The model describing fine-grained turbidites have a few distinctions from the Bauma sequence. These distinctions include vertical size, subtle transition in grain size, identifiable features, and the absence of dune structures. However, it is similar to the Bauma sequence in that it has a few shortcomings. The idealized model here also fails to explain all the complexities of flow, and much like the Bauma sequence, will commonly have missing internal architecture. Classifying sediment gravity flows based entirely on sediment size is useful, but let's consider a sediment-fluid mixture in which the flow rheology changes in a single flow event from turbulent to laminar. Hybrid event beds, or HEBs, retain characteristics of both turbidites and debrites. The debritic characteristics within include floating mud clasts and sand patches in a distinctly muddy matrix. An idealized model was once again constructed, this time by Dr. Peter Houghton. It includes a unique H3 division that disrupts the upward fining pattern common in turbidites. As expected, it also has several shortcomings and is used best purely as an idealized model in which deposits can be compared. It is at this point that I should reiterate the importance of recognizing these models as a framework in which we can identify sediment gravity flows, but is by no means predictive of what we'll see. It is very common to see missing architecture and more complex processes in actual stratigraphy. With knowledge of those sediment gravity flow end members, we can move to our field site, an oil-bearing formation named the Carper Sandstone. The Carper Sandstone is a Mississippian-aged submarine formation that owes its existence to the Acadian orogeny. The Middle Devonian mountain-building event initiated mass movement of sediment westward in a cross-continental clastic sequence. The westernmost front of this sequence was the Borden Siltstone group. The Borden formation consisted of a prograding deltaic formation that fed sediment into a standing body of water known as the Illinois Basin. The formation was thought to be relatively deep water submarine delta system. The foreset slopes distributed coarser sediments, the Carper Sandstone, into geographically dispersed lobes named Carper A through Carper E. These deposits were initially described as turbidite beds. Recently, the sandstone has been designated a potential target for CO2 enhanced oil recovery and storage. The Carper's initial interpretation as foreset turbidites worked for a time, but as I've shown, there has been a large growth in our collective understanding of sediment gravity flows. As such, it is essential to apply a more contemporary framework to the Carper sandstone. Reclassifying the sandstone to fit into a modern sediment gravity flow paradigm can not only tell us about the mechanisms that drove their deposition, but can be important in understanding the reservoir capability of the formation. Absence of outcropping units limited us to just using cores for our analysis. 5 cores from 5 separate wells covered 237.75 feet of vertical length. With that core, we analyzed the formation in a variety of ways. First, we ran through the cores and produced a series of graphic logs. The second type of analysis performed was an in-depth facies scheme, meant to discern the many repeating patterns and features found in the core. Following the facies scheme, we assigned one or more facies to sequences found in the core. This assignment was used to compare sequences in the core to idealized sediment gravity flows discussed earlier. Finally, thin sections of the core were taken and the formation underwent point counting to pinpoint the chemical makeup of the sandstone for diagenetic purposes. The goal of this work was to describe the Carper sandstone in a sediment gravity flow framework and discuss the implications for reservoir quality. So now to dig into the results a little bit. I'll first introduce my facies scheme where I interpreted various units found within the core. Feel free to pause the presentation here to see the full descriptions, but I will talk a little bit more on all of them during the course of the next few slides, walking through their descriptions, their possible origins, and their role in reservoir quality. The first facies found within the core is the massive sandstone. This is your classic massively bedded sandstone generally found at the base of sediment gravity flows. The facies is structureless and often contains an erosive base, while the top often undergoes a more gradual transition to another facies. The lack of internal bedding suggests that the sandstone was in place under turbulent upper flow regime. The sandstone is correlated with higher rates of permeability and porosity, thus making it a very valuable feature of great economic importance. The lack of features and bedding implies that there are limited obstacles preventing liquid storage and withdrawal. It is considered the highest quality reservoir of any internal division in a sediment gravity flow. Often just above or at the base of the sediment gravity flow is the parallel laminated sandstone facies. Sandstone beds in this facies maintain many of the same characteristics as the massive sandstone, including similar grain size, shape, and sortedness. Unlike its structuralist counterpart, the parallel laminated sandstone contains parallel lamination planes with few instances of low-angle laminae and cross-laminae. The laminated nature of the facies was caused by turbulent suppression, allowing for sufficient laminar behavior that encouraged production of thin laminae. The coarse-grained nature of the facies is ideal for extraction purposes, but the thin laminations can produce a non-negligible barrier for liquid movement. Despite that, the facies does contain several fluid escape pipes, a relatively undisturbed conduit for fluid flow. The muddy sandstone facies is a muddy sandstone and siltstone unit. Mud and clay chips are found floating within and sometimes are oriented in a systematic horizontal alignment near the cap of the facies. Clay and mud clasts in the facies undergo an upwards transition from finer to coarser clasts. The facies represents turbulent suppression and movement towards a more cohesive debris flow. Variability of the clay and mud class size confirm this. There is a visible transition from the scouring of small shale clasts from turbulent flow to a dampened and highly cohesive debris flow depositing larger pebble-sized clasts. Like its namesake suggests, this facies contains a high mud to sand ratio in its matrix. The proportion of mud to sand indicates poor reservoir quality with low quantities of porosity and permeability. Now, I would like to apologize for the quality of the image on the right, but if you can squint hard enough, you can just make out the self-aligned shale chips found within this unit. The laminated mudstone is named as such because the facies contain small beds that transition between black claystones and lighter gray siltstones. The interlaminated transition between the clays and the silts are planar and exhibit isolated cases of ripple cross-lamination. This facies is a product of turbulent but progressively more laminar flow caused by turbulence dampening in the clay-rich flow. The unit represents depositional sorting in the flow. As you may have predicted, its muddy petrographic makeup makes this facies a poor conduit for fluids. The last facies described in the Carper Sandstone is the fossiliferous mudstone. This structureless dark gray mudstone contains siderite horizons, bioturbation, and instances of ocean-forming minerals. Bioturbation in this unit were previously interpreted as sclerotuba, planolites, sapphicus, and stick-like traces. Another interesting feature of this unit were the presence of tegmatically folded sand injectites. Deposition of this unit was largely suspension-driven sedimentation from a period of marine deposition in the Borden Deltaic complex. The small grain sizes impede fluid movement, thus making this facies an ideal impermeable cap rock. Fracturing in sand injectites do pose a potential risk to a cap rock, as they are small windows by which fluids can move more easily. As far as I'm aware, however, the exact correlation between fluid movement and injectite size and occurrence is very much still in the early stages. With our facies described, we initiate the process of identifying sediment gravity flow end members in the core. This starts with assigning a facies to all the areas of the core. Then we break these facies into groups or associations that capture a single unconformable flow event. With the facies fragmented, we begin assigning an idealized internal division of a sediment gravity flow to each facies. As an example, the massive sandstone facies discussed earlier show similar sedimentary features, grain size, and vertical extent to both the TA division of the turbidite and the H1 division of the hybrid event bed. Once all facies are converted to the internal divisions, we can begin identifying individual end members. The image on the right is a great example of a location where we found 3 separate hybrid event beds that began as an SP, SU, and MF facies. These were then capped into single flow events and then assigned a sediment gravity flow counterpart. Using the method just described, I was able to identify 20 instances of turbidites in the core. None of these sequences contain the full idealized turbidite model proposed by Dr. Bauma. Not only was there no complete sequence, but the most commonly found sequence had the orientation TA to TE, a seamless transition from a massive sandstone to a mudstone cap with nothing between. All the end members were measured, and the average height of each internal division in each sequence is shown. Perhaps most interesting is how specific divisions, say TB, may have a different average height in different sequences. Now, as you can see on this page, we found significantly more hybrid event beds than we did turbidites. However, beds of this kind were often shorter, and the most common orientations were often more complete. Not only are HEB deposits smaller than the turbidites, but each facies found within the HEBs were smaller, except for one. The parallel laminated sandstone, indicated as H2 here, was actually larger than the laminated sandstones found in the turbidites. Finding hybrid event beds in the core produces 2 significant results. It changes the way we interpret the depositional environment of the Carper sandstone, and it changes how we view the reservoir quality of the formation. First, we must recognize that the presence of HEBs signify that our depositional environment was likely within the fringe region of our prograding delta system, in accordance with the research. The abundance of cogenetic turbidites and debrites is also critical in our understanding of the reservoir potential of the Carper sandstone. The HEBs found were often base cut and contained characteristically high mud and clay ratios in the matrix, resulting in lower porosity. Thus, concentrated areas of HEBs may make the Carper sandstone less impermeable than previously thought. Another complication is the sand injectites. Unfortunately, using only core, we have limited knowledge on the spatial distribution of the injectites, but they could potentially add an extra layer of complexity in our reservoir analysis. I would like to conclude with an important thought on this project. Reclassifying sediment gravity flows to fit more modern paradigms can lead to more thoroughly understood formations and can be used to better predict fluid migration and implement better parameters for reservoir modeling. In this experiment, we've molded the Carper sandstone's earlier interpretation of 4-set turbidites into a mixed HEB and turbidite system that indicates not only a departure in the interpretation, but will also be crucial for reservoir modeling. I'd like to stop here and give thanks and acknowledgement to everyone that was critical in this specific project and in the broader Illinois Basin project. Thank you everyone for listening and for all your help, and have a great day.